Hey, I'm Coach T. This is my C# DevLog where I'm logging 1 year of study trying to learn C# from basically scratch. This is week 22, and for the last 3-4 weeks, I've been primarily focused on using Unity. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is the learning progress with Unity, but relying on the C# skills that I built over the last 4 or 5 months. And it really is starting to kind of come together. Like a lot of the things that I've used in C#, I'm using in Unity. Now, because I'm doing a lot of the work on my laptop, which is upstairs, that way I can be around the girls, I can show my daughter what I'm working on, I can get up and help with the baby. I don't always have the scripts here on the PC downstairs where I prefer to work. It's also cold in the basement because it's difficult to tell, but all that white is snow. And my sad little avocado tree that grows, it persists. So it's cold down in the basement. It means I don't really want to work down here unless I absolutely have to. So what I'm going to do in a couple of minutes is I'm going to switch over me talking, and I'm just going to show 2 of the projects that I was working on this week with some capture footage. So what did I do? I'm busy, right? As I said, over the last couple of weeks, my job responsibilities have expanded, and that means I have less time for working. But what I really wanted to focus on was understanding how to call a script or a function from one script or one object in Unity to another. So for example, I want an object to call a take damage function on another. What is involved in that? Because let's say that I have an enemy prefab, and I can't manually connect the player to every single one of those enemies. I can't necessarily do that, especially if I have multiple units. So I was really playing with object composition and then scene architecture to begin to figure out how can I efficiently allow these scripts to access one another. And what I kind of settled on is for permanent fixtures of the level, I pass those as a reference to a scene manager script, which kind of acts as an overall director. And then as I instantiate prefabs, like for enemies, they automatically have an access to that scene manager so that they can find the active unit. And that solved the active player unit. That solved an issue that I introduced when I began to examine nav meshes. That was the other thing that I started to play with. So the image here in the background is kind of indicative of that, and you'll see this come to play in a minute. But I got thinking, like, okay, I can move something around. I more or less understand how to use a character controller. I can set up a twin stick or first-person controller. But the AI that's introduced in Unity in Action by Joe Hocking basically has the enemy raycast forward to see if it hits an obstruction within range, and if it does, then it rotates a random degree and it'll move in that direction. But what it can't do is it can't pursue the player. It's entirely random whether or not it turns in that direction. So I was like, all right, I have a bad feeling that pathfinding AI is going to be complicated, but let's look at the tools built into the engine, because instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, I need to learn to rely on the tools available in the libraries that I'm studying. So I went looking, and wouldn't you know it, Unity has a very simple built-in nav mesh system. And I would not have known that. So I was able to implement 2 different types of nav meshes in a micro project that I'm calling Project Syracuse. I've picked out some city names in New York for some of these micro projects. And it's going to be here on the screen in just a second. But what happens is when I hit 1, 2, or 3 on my keypad, then it changes the active unit to be one of the 3, I think in the version that you're going to see, they're cylinders. And then if I right click, the cylinder will use the nav agent to intelligently or semi-intelligently identify the shortest path to the indicated objective. On the other side, I have an AI, a very rudimentary AI, that has a detection sense. So it's looking for player units through the scene manager. That's an array stored in the scene manager, the player's deployed units. And if any of them come within range of its alert detection, then it will rotate to face them And if they get close enough, it will begin to pursue them. Now, it doesn't do anything yet. It doesn't cause damage if it, touches them. But I'm just working with the basic nav mesh agent, and I'm able to accomplish a lot more than I would have thought with relatively few lines of code. Now, this is the very first time, too, that I've really made a state machine for an AI, and it's very, very simple. It boils down to what is the outer sense distance and what is the aggression distance where it will begin to pursue, and then it just subtracts the different transforms to figure out if any of those transforms are within range. Then it will pursue that particular one using agent.setDestination to target transform. So it's kind of crazy that I can just spit that off. Like a year ago, this would have been Greek to me. Now, I did have to use Copilot a couple of times. I'd say about 95% of the work that I did this week was my own, working from the Unity APIs or working from C# skills or looking at Joe Hawking's book and then translating it over to my game or my micro project. But there were a couple times where my syntax was wacky and I could not use the Unity debugger to figure out why. And it usually turned out to I was failing to pass the appropriate reference. In one case, I was saying the unit controller script equals get component unit controller, but it wasn't finding it because the scene controller didn't have a unit controller. I needed to tell it to search the active unit, and Copilot sussed that out for me. But I spent about 20 minutes trying to figure it out on my own. And that was kind of a learning experience. Like, oh, okay, all right. So here's how the syntax is put together. I need to have basically the subject of the sentence before the verb. Otherwise, and that, I guess formulating it like that makes it feel kind of fairly obvious to me, but it is what it is. So I'm fine. I finished the first of my micro projects for Unity, which was a very rudimentary twin stick shooter that you can use the controller to instance a bullet. The bullet will fly, and you should see this on the screen at this point. And you hit X to reload, and there is an enemy that will turn to look at you. And I don't remember if I put it into this micro project, but there may be an enemy that pursues as well, along with the drop pod deployment. So my first micro project is done. The second one that I want to do is more complicated, and it uses the input system at a greater degree. So being able to swap weapons, which in this case are only going to be presented as different blocks, probably different colored blocks, so I can see. And I want to have two enemy types, one that's stationary and looks, one that pursues using the new nav mesh system, a slightly bigger level that allows for some more maneuvering, and the twin stick shooter. And I've got a kind of laundry list of things that I want to work into this one. And then I'm going to move on to this third project that I started exploring yesterday called Project Syracuse. And Project Syracuse is going to be a point and click interface that has a number of units that you can use, and you have to use those units to solve some puzzles. So you'll have, like, let's say a fire team of 3 cubes, probably, or cylinders, and you need to navigate a map that uses awareness of like colliders and collisions and triggers and a couple of enemies maybe to give a little bit of threat to the player with an end state. And that'll be 3 kind of complicated micro projects building up from the ground up, and that's what Hawking recommends in his book. If I can get that far, I think it might be time to look at doing something a little bit more complicated. Most of these are taking me like 3-4 days to work through to build. But I have a growing idea of what I want to build. I'm really thinking about building a twin stick shooter with multiple levels, and I was tied to the twin stick shooter, but I was so pleased with the point and click. I guess I'd compare it to like RuneScape or Diablo or Dawn of War maybe. I'm not very familiar with the genre, which is one thing, but I was so pleased that it worked that I kind of want to pursue it. I like the idea of the tactical navigation. And that does fit with the theme of Feet First into Hell for Lionborn Publishing that I work with, that I write for. So I'm kind of at an interesting juncture where I've got two different paths I could go down. I could go down, I'd be happy to do a twin stick shooter that involves, like an action RPG. And that's actually what Hawking is going to have me build at the end of the book. But also there's part of me that's like, I kind of want to play with this idea of like the tactical navigation. I just need to have like a particular button or button press to have the units regroup around you. So yeah, there's something there. I mean, I'm only on week 4 or 5 of using Unity with any kind of focus sense. So there's a long way to go. I don't know how to highlight things yet. I don't know how to animate. I don't know how to add sound effects. I vaguely understand how to store weapons in an array. I do have some Udemy courses for these. But as many of you probably know, you start to get out of tutorial hell, and then you want to build your own stuff. So it's like, do I want to spend my evenings building somebody else's tutorial project at this point, or do I want to continue to kind of feel around in the darkness and then maybe build something that's kind of cool? So I'm not sure what the most expeditious path is. The Udemy courses, do tend to introduce a lot of interesting things that then I can build on. But there's also tremendous value in having built things for myself. So that's where I'm at. I showed off 2 of the projects here in this video on the overlay, and this week, we've got 2 weeks left before the real holiday break, and I think over that holiday break, I'm going to prioritize putting 2 or 3 hours a day into really buttoning down either Project Albany, which is the twin stick shooter, or actually, no, it'll be Project Boston at that point. That's the second follow-up. Or really dialing in on making Project Syracuse, which is the point-and-click RPG, the mechanics better. Maybe even building a rudimentary UI for it. So I don't know. If you got thoughts, we're closing on 200 subscribers, but if you got thoughts or ideas or questions or whatever, drop them in the comments. Subscribe if that's a thing that you like to do. I don't really pay very much attention to the analytics, but it's kind of neat. And keep building cool stuff. Stay fierce, and we're getting close to the holidays, so Happy New Year in advance if I don't hear from you again. All right, I'll be back next week with hopefully more cool stuff. I'm Coach T. See you later.